Now, I recommend to anybody who wants to get serious about betting on sports to really consider the MLB. Because if you just bet on, let's say, the major sports, the NBA and NFL, you get those high money lines. In baseball, excuse me, in baseball, there are many different ways to parlay, especially with such low money lines in this sport. I recommend any sports bettor to consider the MLB. Even if you don't like baseball or you don't know much about baseball, consider learning something at least about the betting side of it. Because this can get you really paid, especially parlaying such low amounts on the money lines. Even the high amounts on the spreads can get you a lot more. The spreads are always in the negative pretty much on those major sports. These you get a lot of plus 142s like this, and they hit more so plus 30, plus 130. You don't get those high spreads with those popular sports. Consider the MLB. Now, with that being said, first game today, May 13th, Yankees versus Orioles. Yankees not a huge favorite in this one, minus 166 on the money line. But for baseball, that is relatively obviously on the somewhat on the higher side. Minus 166 there, negative 166 for the Yankees at 96% and 88%, 96% money, 88% betting. Now, this minus 166, if you see this increase, easy win for the Yankees. Let's say this goes up to minus 172, minus 174, minus 176, something like that. While maintaining, they may not end up in a 90th percentile. They may end up somewhere around 85 by the time the game starts. Maybe even about 88, somewhere there. Consider going with the Yankees on the ML. Now, as far as the Angels and Guardians, minus 146. By the way, Yankees are above that minus 150 threshold. I was meaning to say that. The teams that are above that minus 150, negative 150 threshold in baseball normally are victorious. 79% for Cleveland, 80% for Cleveland on the money. And easy victory. If the Guardians go over that minus 150 threshold, easy victory for the Guardians. Now, Cincinnati Reds, minus 150. We're just going to run through the MLs for today. And I might touch up on the spreads as I go by on a few games. Minus 158. They're above that minus 150 threshold for the Cincinnati Reds. Let me scroll down here. Excuse that ad. All right, they're only getting 37% of the money, though. 63% going to Washington. With Washington being plus 134, they're 63% of the money. However, they're only 38% of the betting. So people putting heavy money on Washington. If you see Washington, and a lot of that is because they're only 37% on the money. They're 37% on the money here with the spread at minus 156. If you see the spread increase in cost, let's say it goes to minus 160. Right now it's at minus 156 for Washington. And you see this plus 134. Let's say this ends up plus 130 and minus, let's say, 152, something like that. Minus 152 plus 130. Then you would have to consider, with Washington getting that 63% of the money, you would have to consider going with the Cincinnati Reds only if they maintain that above minus 150 threshold. If you see Cincinnati go below that, then go with the Reds. Monitor that spread, though, and that will determine whether Washington wins. Monitor that spread. It goes up to minus 160 on the spread. Definitely consider Washington on the spread regardless of the money line there. All right, Colorado versus Pittsburgh. Plus 150 for Colorado, minus 178 for Pittsburgh. Where's the money going? Heavily on Pittsburgh, obviously. Rockies are still a little rocky this year. And minus 178, they're better though this year than they were last year. Minus 178 for the there's a glare on my screen, by the way. That's why I'm struggling to look at it. Minus 178 here. Minus 140 on the spread though for the Rockies. Okay, where are they on the spread? 6%, only 6%. Okay. For Colorado to get that spread, that would have to increase significantly. But with such a low amount, 16% and 6% on the money, 16% on the ML, 6% on the spread, Colorado could take this across the board. They could. Pittsburgh is a massive favorite, especially in baseball. This minus 178 is a massive favorite. Pittsburgh maintains this while maintaining this over 80th percentile. Go with Pittsburgh on the ML. However, they dip beneath that and hold this or decrease. Go with Colorado across the board. Philadelphia versus Boston. Minus 132. By the way, picks and props will be on the Patreon. Link is in the description and in the video. Plus 112 for Philadelphia. Minus 132 for Boston. All right, let's see. All right, 57% of the money going with the Phillies and 88% of the money going with the Red Sox. Okay. Plus 152 for the Red Sox. Minus 132 for the Red Sox on the money line. Red Sox look decent across the board, especially with this 88 percentile with this plus 152. Now what you want to see is this plus 152 decrease. If you see that decrease, then go with the Phillies. But as this is looking right now, especially with this 57% going with the Phillies on this plus 112 here, see that decrease at all, plus 112, go with the Phillies across the board. If not, go with Boston across the board. I don't think this is going to be one of those games where it flips like underdog wins the spread and favorite wins the ML. Who you go with on the ML, who you go with on the spread, go with on the ML, and vice versa. Obviously, if it's an underdog, you go with them across the board anyway. TB, Toronto. Tampa Bay versus Toronto, excuse me. Plus 142 for the Rays. Minus 168. Okay, that's a relatively high money line for Toronto. Minus 168. Minus 156 for Tampa Bay. Let's see where the splits are. Let me scroll down. All right, 85% going with Tampa Bay on the ML on the money. 73% going with Toronto on the money on the ML. This looks like this could be one of those games. Tampa Bay on the spread, Toronto on the ML. Looks like more than likely that could happen if these odds hold. Looks decent. Detroit versus New York Mets. All right. Spread not available at the moment. 62% going with the Mets on the ML. At minus 106. Okay, so this is a pick'em game. All right. And with the Mets being an underdog in this game, especially indicated by the spread, Mets look decent across the board. Now, they can flip this. If they flip this, New York Mets go to the favorite and Detroit goes to the dog, then, Detroit goes to the dog, excuse me. Then you would go with Detroit. But as this currently stands, the Mets look decent across the board. And that over 8 looks decent on that total as well. Minus 110 even. 85% betting going with Detroit. 75% money going with Detroit. All right. Chicago versus Atlanta. Minus 144 going with Chicago Cubs, plus 122 for the Atlanta Braves. This minus 134 is Keto, along with this plus 112. Chicago could take this one with that plus 112 on the spread, minus 144 on the ML, but let's see where the splits are. 50-50 on the betting currently, early in the morning. 513, 66% on the money. 68% on the money, excuse me. Going with the Atlanta Braves. People looking to cash this out. Atlanta Braves go up on percentile. While Atlanta holds this around this plus 120-ish range, then go with the Cubs across the board. Cubs look decent in this game across the board as it currently stands. If you definitely see them go above that minus 150 threshold, regardless of what happens on the ML here, as long as they don't dip too far, they probably won't though, especially since they're a favorite, then go with the Cubs across the board. All right, Kansas City versus Chicago White Sox. Pick'em game as well, minus 112 here, going with the Royals. Minus 104 going with the White Sox. And this minus 170 is super high. It's hard to go against that, especially since it's so high. But let's see where these splits are for the Royals versus White Sox. No spread available at the moment. 53% going with the White Sox and 46 on 46 on the betting, 53% on the money. Minus 104 here. Whichever one has the highest one here, you would take them. You would take them on the money line, that is. Looks like the White Sox across the board. Let's go to the next one, San Diego versus Milwaukee. Minus 146 for Milwaukee, plus 124 for San Diego. Minus 146 for Milwaukee. Let's see. 65% on the money, 75% on the betting. Okay. Minus 146 for the Brewers. But this this negative 178 is so. This negative 178 is so crucial. However, if you combine them, look at that. You parlay it, that's plus 1, plus 3, 4. I told y'all about baseball. How them odds work. You can win real good money with just 2-leg parlays. But that minus 178 is critical. Okay, yeah, you can't do that. Okay, I was just wondering. Definitely can't do that one. All right. Minus 1, excuse me, I'm just checking stuff. Minus 178 for the Padres. Looks decent. But in order for the bookies to win, you got to think like a bookie. In order for the bookies to get money, they would have to take it here on the money line. But let's see where the splits are one more time. 65% going with Milwaukee and 85% on the spread going with Milwaukee. 85% they're looking to cash that out. More than likely won't happen on the spread, that is. San Diego looks decent across the board on the road. All right, let me scroll down. All right, let's see. Marlins versus Minnesota. Minus 124 for the Marlins. Minnesota plus 106. All right, 75% going with the Marlins and okay, people going big on the Marlins here. Minus 124. This probably started as a pick'em game. Let me scroll down. More than likely probably started as a pick'em game. Okay. Somewhat. Minus 122 plus 104. Okay, now it's minus 124 plus 106. Let's see what the 75% and 98%. So it has increased here for Miami. Plus 136 here, though. They're getting 98% on the spread at this plus 136. Bookies probably will not want to leave this out. However, you can parlay these into plus 518. And that's what they want to avoid more than just giving you this plus 136. So I would actually, normally I wouldn't do this. There's not going to be a crisscross in this game. Either Miami or Minnesota is going to win this game. And the way if Miami goes up on the money line, go with Miami across the board. If Minnesota holds this or decreases, goes, toward plus 102, plus 104, something like that. Or even if they go up to plus 108, go with Minnesota, they're going to hold that minus 164. They're not going to cross this at that plus 518. That's a lot of odds to hand over the plus 136 on the spread. That's how I think of things. All right, Arizona versus Texas. Pretty much same odds as the last game opening, except flip-flop home to away. Plus 104 for Arizona, minus 122 for Texas. Minus 205 for Arizona. Let's see. Okay, spread not available. All right, 57% for Arizona at minus 205. Okay. At minus 205, Texas minus 122 at 43%, 57%. Let's see how they opened. Minus 138. Okay, so they dropped a little bit, significantly. Arizona looks decent across the board. Arizona looks decent in this game across the board. Now, most Texas Rangers games are 8.5 points on the totals. And normally those totals, when they are 8.5 and the other team has the favorite in the negative, which they do now, the cost that is minus 112, I would, well, normally the under gets it. So I would lean toward that under with Arizona winning across the board, only as it currently stands. Only as it currently stands. Seattle versus Houston, minus 124. For Seattle, plus 106 for Houston. Minus 162 for Houston. On the spread, 91% money. 86%, so Seattle's people betting heavily on Seattle in this game. Could happen. Let's see where they were here. Okay, they went up. Okay, that's a huge indicator. And so they're going up on odds. They're going up here. Seattle looks good here. But if you parlay this, what is that? Yeah, that's plus. Yeah, that's halfway to 1,000. Halfway to 1,000 odds. Ugh. Seattle looks decent across the board in that one. And I would take that over 9 as long as this minus 115 holds. St. Louis versus the Athletics. Cardinals versus the Athletics. Let me scroll back up a little bit. Scroll down a little bit. All right. Minus 152. The Athletics are above that minus 150 threshold. Minus 154 for the St. Louis Cardinals. Let's see where the splits are. Go down one more. 74% going with St. Louis. And 65% going with St. Louis. Okay, 74 and 65 going with St. Louis. Plus 128 minus 152. Let's see. 26% and 31%. Okay. 26% and 31% going with the Athletics, excuse me. Not a very high percentage. So, in this kind of game, normally I would go with St. Louis across the board as it currently stands right now. Because they're not, let's see, where is this going? Plus 408, that's a little more reasonable. I would go with St. Louis on the spread, the run line they call it in baseball, and the minus 152 currently for the Athletics, only as it currently stands. San Francisco versus LA Dodgers. Let's see. LA Dodgers minus 250. Plus 1.5. Okay, plus 1.5 and minus 106 cost. Let's see where these splits are in this one. Hard to go against the Dodgers when they're rated so high, 68%, and getting high splits as well. On the ML, 86% here. 86% on the run line, minus 113. Okay. Not a very high negative value, but it is higher than minus 106. And they are getting 86%. So I would lean toward the Dodgers across the board, and that under is getting that minus 112. Relatively low over. I expected more of that over 8 to go, but more people are betting that under as it currently stands. Whichever one has the higher cost, go with that one. But if it's minus 110, look out for how the total adjusts. Does it go up to 8.5? Does it go down to 7.5? If it goes down to 7.5, go with that under. If it goes up, go with the over. And thus, that should have the higher cost. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Pray every day. Join the Patreon. Link is in the description and in the video. And yeah, you guys take care.